Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar on Established Medicines Licensing Process. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You have joined the presentation listening using your computer speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the telephone, just select Telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions via Slido at www.slido.com using the event code ESTMEDSOCT24. You may send your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect this and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Please note that we will not be accepting questions via the GoToWebinar chat function. It is now my pleasure to introduce your first speaker, Julian Beach, Interim Executive Director of Healthcare Quality and Access Group, MHRA.
Thank you, and good morning to everybody. Just like to say welcome to all of you to the webinar this morning. So with myself, Julian, I'd like to introduce Rachel Bricoli, Interim Deputy Director for Population Health within HQA, within MHRA. And we will be talking you through this agenda today. So really just looking up the purpose of this agenda is to follow up from previous webinars back in March and April, and then the performance updates that we have been giving over the summer and into where we are now. And firstly, I would just like to thank everybody for everybody's collaboration to enable us to achieve the performance that Rachel will go through later on. And really just to emphasize that it is still a work in progress. This webinar is really focused on the established medicines, so we won't be taking questions on other topics. For example, we won't be taking questions on IRP or Windsor Framework, but if there are other questions, we will be having other webinars and other opportunities, so that we do intend to run further MHRA clinics as we have done previously, where open questions on any topic are we will be looking to answer for everybody. So as we go through, we're just going to go through our performance, a bit of an update on the process changes that we have been introducing, what we really need and in continuing support from all of you, where we are, and then an opportunity to ask questions, and we will hopefully keep that relatively long, so maybe half the webinar can be on questions. So as I'm sure people would like to really just remind ourselves, so if we go to the next slide, really the background as to where we are and why we are here. Over 22, 23, and maybe even a bit before annual years, we had a build-up of applications in all of our licensing criteria where the level of performance was not where we wanted it to be. We have had a number of events on the on that timeline which have contributed to a much deteriorated than desired performance. Really what I'd like to remind people, if we go on to the next slide, the overriding strategic priorities in the 24-25 business plan, which has just recently been published, really looking at the key components of that which we are delivering right now, is really looking at being transparent, looking at proactive communication. We have been in a place where the volumes of communication coming to us have been exceeding our capability to respond back on all events, but that is now changing quite considerably. We also want to enable access to safe and effective medical products. We want to do that on time and reliably, so that we want to make sure that the applications as they come in, we are responding to them, we are making sure that we have an effective review, and that has delivered quite a number of the improvements that we've been working through. So where we have had to make hard decisions, and I really appreciate that some of those have had commercial impact, but it's really to get us to a place where we are treating everybody fairly, putting the same decisions to all organizations, but also making sure that we are bringing the performance back to where it should be. In addition, so that we are working through how we build our science and regulatory excellence, so the activities that we're working through for CERCES, so that continues to be a major function in terms of developing our licensing and other aspects within the agency. And really, all of that is predicated on having people enjoying the work that they're doing, allowed to flourish. And I can't go without saying, and there's a big thank you to all of our staff within MHRA for the extraordinarily hard efforts and work that they all put in, the long hours they put in to achieve this effort. And I think that the levels of commitment that we've seen from our staff have been exemplary. Looking and working through the applications, we have had as I say, a backlog that we've had to deal with, and particularly with established medicines, as Rachel will go into. Really, that's looking at ensuring that we have the right review done quickly, and then with a decisive outcome, and then really getting to a mindset where we are making decisions based on an application as presented, looking to hopefully approve, but being very decisive and saying, if it's not, it's because of this, and this is then what is required. And I hope you will have seen that come through in the activities, the responses, as we've gone through this year. You will have seen that communication is starting to improve. I wouldn't say it's anywhere near where we need it to be. And Rachel can come on to that in terms of some of the communications we're looking at. But really, it's about making sure that we have the UK as a place where medicines can be licensed safely and effectively. So if we go on to the next slide, please. So our goals. So really for generic and biosimilar medicines, and we want to be looking at all of these aspects very clearly. So faster approvals. And as we go through this year and into next year, it's not going to be a flip of a switch. There's not going to be a time when we are just going to say, we are instituting timetable control. We are improving timetable control. And Rachel will go through a bit about what that means about our statutory timelines and what people can expect. We do need to keep streamlining our processes. So where we're looking at the review, it has to be appropriate to the type of medicine that we have coming in. It has to be appropriate to the level of complexity. And that's really where looking at the numbers of questions that we ask continues to be a question in itself. But what we are focused on is those things which are truly impacting quality, safety, and efficacy of a medicine. And that is where our remit is, to making sure that we then prioritize public health. And we do that in a number of ways, both through prioritization of applications, through looking at particular health trends that we see coming through, looking at subsequent things around the preventing of shortages, so that we will be looking at a further webinar on shortages to explain what the MHRA does in enabling the prevention of shortages and also resolving them. But where we see shortages, we have always done and have always prioritized through either type 1B, type 2, or national application shortage medicines to be resolved. Some things it makes sense to resolve if it's a very long shortage, and some things will be very short in their duration because of particular point issues. So the actions that we need to take have to balance that right the way across the board. We have continued and to focus on looking at first off patent, where we can review and improve our processes for that, looking at the provision over the next 3 or 4 years. It's really pleasing to see the numbers of applications coming in, the proactiveness of companies, and we are looking to ensure that the review is in that time to enable companies to be able to market at the end of marketing exclusivity. So those things are happening, and we do prioritize based on first off patent as we're coming out of the backlog. So that has been one of those public health considerations where we have looked to ensure when applications are there that we are able to review those promptly. It does not mean to say that if somebody puts a late application where we have lots of already approved licenses, that we will be prioritizing those additional licenses over and above any other. It's more to make sure that we have sufficient volumes to enable that first off patent to be prioritized immediately. And all of that is with joined up working. So as we are going through our transitions, we are increasing the numbers of staff that we are employing, so that you will see and have continued to see over the last year adverts for staff to come join us within the assessment areas, and they continue, so that we are starting a further round of recruitment. And that is to make sure that we have the right numbers of people to enable the links between generic, biosimilar, biological, chemical, and new active substances to be effectively delivered across all of the different modalities that we need to license. So that's where we are looking at, and that's what we are really striving every day to ensure that we achieve. And I'll hand over now to Rachel to go through our performance about what we have achieved.
Great, thank you, Julian. So yeah, if you could just move on to the next slide, that'd be great. So the first thing that I do want to just remind everybody is what is the Established Medicines Backlog. So it is national initial applications for products with known active substances, not new, but under any legal basis. So they can be generics, but they also could be well-established use applications or even full applications. So this is really presenting a timeline of where we've been and where we are and where we're going. So as you'll know from previous webinars, we in January 2024 took some action to start trying to reduce the backlog as soon as possible. We knew that we needed to take urgent action, not only in this particular area, but across other areas. But of course, this webinar is only focusing on Established Medicines Backlog. The number at the bottom there is what the applications that were overdue as of the 9th of January, which was 1,167. We took action by categorising the applications, taking a very good look at understanding what the backlog consisted of, and introduced some new processes, which I will go over in subsequent slides. So moving on to where we are now, we have come an awful long way. We're very proud of what we have achieved so far, but we also know that there's still an awful lot to do. So you'll see from the bottom bullet there of the blue box that we have reduced that original backlog that was 1,167 down to, it'll say 51 on that slide because this was prepared a few weeks ago, but actually that now sits at 44. So that's a really significant reduction, well over 95% of applications that were in backlog. That has been achieved by both the implementation of internal and external process changes, which I will also come to. In being able to reduce the backlog to less than 200 meant that we met our commitment amongst our industry partners to reduce that less than 200 by the end of September. And this is the most important thing, I think, that Julian was mentioning earlier. Any application from the 1st of September that has been submitted and validated will be processed within 2 days. That is our commitment. We we may not be issuing an RFI within the timelines that you may have expected for a day 210 procedure. So previous national procedures would have run with you receiving an RFI around about day 100. We won't necessarily be able to do that because, of course, we're transitioning from backlog into business as usual. But we will ensure that in the shorter amount of time that is left within those 210 days, that we will finalise these procedures and move to grant. So the red box is where we aim to be. You know, we are focusing now on being able to eliminate the overall backlog. And what we mean by that is that previously we were talking about this original backlog, which was a ring-fence backlog. This overall backlog includes those applications that have fallen overdue in those months since January. We know that approximately 14 fall overdue every week, and so it is a moving target to eliminate the entire backlog, and we are working to do that by the end of December this year. We are you know, very focused on implementing a sustainable model and sustainable solutions, and you know, looking to do that for next year. At the same time, we do need to try and maintain the current operational performance, but you know, and also look to how we could further improve that into the new year. As Julian said, you know, we have been taking the applications in a particular order and a particular prioritisation that we covered in previous webinars around the oldest applications first in, first out. But we have expedited the assessment of products that have been able to mitigate any supply shortage issues, and also those for first generics. If you just move on to the next slide, please. So this will be a familiar table for most of you. This is what we publish on the 15th of every month. And this is one that was recently published a couple of days ago for September's data. I'm not going to focus on all the different rows of the table because some of them really fall outside the scope of this particular webinar. But just looking at the variations, you know, we have significantly improved our performance against type 1B variations. Some people will remember, you know, the percentage granted within statutory time being significantly lower than that. So now we're operating at 97% within the statutory time, which is well within our KPI. We're handling significant volumes and still delivering this. If I move to the type 2 variations, you'll see that we are taking longer than the 90 days that is allowable for most type 2 variations in law, and that we have a relatively low, much lower than we'd like, percentage granted within statutory times at 57%. We're aware of this and we are taking action to improve this significantly. But as in previous webinars, we've spoken about our approach being not to whack-a-mole necessarily. We want to take control of a particular area and maintain that control. So we have done that within the type 1B space. We're working very hard to do that within the national MA space, and variations are coming up slightly behind that, but there is significant activity in that area. And I know that we have a pre-submitted question on that, and Julian will be taking that in due course. So if we look to the bottom section where we're talking about initial applications, and we focus on the second row down, you'll see that the established medicines marketing authorisation applications at the moment, the average time to determine in days is still high. That is 578 days. Now, this reflects the fact that we are taking things that are considerably overdue, and we're taking them first. We expect that number to really reduce over the coming months as we move into taking much more recently submitted work. And again, the percentage granted within statutory time is 1% this month, and you'll have seen from previous months that that was around 19% in the subsequent months. At the moment, you know, this is entirely expected because of the prioritisation strategy and the order in which we're taking the work, that we're not expecting very many to be granted within statutory time at this point. And we will again be looking for a significant improvement in that into next year. The things that probably will be being granted within statutory timelines are, again, those things that we have expedited or prioritised for supply reasons, or because they were first generics. The very bottom line in that table is work on hand. Now, previous months we were reporting 2 lines there. So we reported what we're calling the overall backlog, that ring-fenced backlog that we have got down now to 44 applications, and the overall backlog, so including the number that have fallen overdue, which here is listed as 353. Going forward, because we have made such a significant improvement with that original backlog, we don't intend to report on that and take out that as a separate figure. And from this month onwards, you'll notice that we're just talking about a backlog, which is that 353 applications. So if we move on to the next slide, please. We've covered in previous webinars the process changes that we have made. If I just take the next slide as well, we have made some tweaks to them, but if I just go over the measures that we have implemented over the previous months to get to the position where we are now. So you'll remember right at the start there in January, we offered any eligible national marketing authorisations awaiting first assessment to convert to an MRDCRP or an ECDRP if eligible. We can still allow that for applications that were submitted before the 1st of January, appreciating that some European procedures may be concluding now throughout this year. So that is still an option if people wish to convert and we have not yet completed the first assessment. We've also done quite a bit of work to support right first time applications. Both industry and us as regulators want to be in a position where the applications that are submitted to us are of suitable quality, and that will obviously help us efficiently assess and move to approval of the products. So we have published checklists to support. Well, there's slight disturbance on the line. I don't know if we need to mute. Okay. We have published checklists to support these right first time applications. There's one for bioequivalent studies and for biowaivers, and there's a separate one for product information. Please do remember to consult those ahead of submissions, because we have found that the quality of the applications have been improving because of this. Again, I think Julia mentioned some of the work that we're hoping to do and are doing around continuous improvements. We have previously highlighted common application flaws where we see deficiency points raised again and again. The areas that we usually raise these on are there's issues with the bioequivalence data that's been generated, or there's an inappropriate use of a biowaiver that isn't justified. We also raise major objections on the product specification, the appropriateness of the dissolution methods and limits, and on the proposed impurity limits and on the tests. An area that is a little bit of a moving target and is a relatively recent addition, obviously, is the nitrosamine risk assessment. Obviously, we're aware that from one day to the next, a new nitrosamine can be published for any given active, and applicants are reminded to keep abreast of the CMDH limits to which we also adhere. Alongside these are the more external visible changes that we're making, but internally we're also making considerable process improvements as well. If you just move on to the next slide then, please. So the process changes that we introduced on the 1st of March have now been in place for well over 6 months. We have reviewed them as we agreed to as part of a 3-month review, and I will come to our findings and what we're going to do on the back of that in the next slide. But just as a bit of a recap on what the process meant, what it actually changed about the way in which we're tackling these applications. So the first thing was that we have introduced a completeness check. Any incomplete application will not be processed. So this is separate from validation. This is where essentially, no assessment of the content of the document has been made. This is essentially if there are huge data gaps in applications, we will not continue to assess it. We also are operating with only one request for further information. That is to ensure that we are able to progress these applications in the shortest possible time. The third change was that we asked applicants to submit a pre-populated template for the lay summary for the public assessment report. We are continuing to apply these processes to all applications in the Established Medicines backlog. If we move on to the next slide, then we'll talk about some of the updates we have made to the guidance and what next. So when we reviewed this after the 3-month review, we think that we will continue these changes until further notice. The changes that we implemented have been effective. We can see that from the numbers in the backlog and the improved performance over the last few months. The way in which that we have increased our productivity significantly was to take a different approach to each application based on risk and complexity of the product. We have categorised our backlog, we know what is in there, and we will do a risk proportionate assessment of that product. Again, I'll mention that technical completeness check where we have not proceeded to assess applications that are not complete. We not only have introduced the one RFI approach, but we also have strict adherence to the 60-day response timeline that is given in that RFI. We are refusing extension requests unless there is a particular public health need. So that is a case-by-case decision, but of the extension requests we have received so far, the vast majority are being refused. As said before, we are going to continue with these changes until further notice. We didn't highlight any significant concerns when we did the 3-month review, and we intend to keep this process in place for the duration of the backlog clearance and into next year to support a transition into business as usual. We have taken other steps to work to a more sustainable model within the MHRA. We are doing a lot of work on training our assessors and making sure that we have the most streamlined, efficient training pattern for them. You'll also notice that we have had adverts out recently for lots of different assessor types across the range of disciplines. We have had a significant number of new pharmaceutical assessors joining us in the last few months, and training is well underway for some of those. So what we have changed with a recent update to that process is that we have changed slightly some of the wording around our intention to notify applicants before we're due to begin assessment. Because of the volume of the applications that we are dealing with at any given time and the pace at which we're moving, it is sometimes quite difficult to let the applicant know that we are about to begin that assessment. The reason we wanted to introduce that was because we wanted to give applicants the opportunity to take suitable action. If they no longer wanted that application to be assessed and they were thinking about withdrawal, then if we hadn't begun assessment, we were offering that we would give a 90% refund back in line with the fees regulations for any of those applications. We also asked the applicants updated their dossier with updated information. Say, for instance, some of the certificates or declarations had expired in the time that the application had been with us, or if further stability data, for instance, had been generated in that time. We were asking that the application be updated to the point that when we started looking at it, that we had the most recent information. While we probably in some instances will not have the opportunity to send this notification to applicants, we do want to remind everybody that we would like people to be submitting updates to their application in line if, for instance, some of the documents have expired, or if there is any additional data that you would like to be assessed at the first assessment. We would like people to do that as a new sequence. They don't need to tell us that we're doing that, and we will make sure that when we undertake that first assessment, we'll take the latest data into account. If we just move on to the next slide then, please. So that's what we've been doing, and now this is a little bit about how we would like you to continue to help us. So far we've had exceptional collaboration, and the success is down to the efforts that have been done both sides of the table, both in-house, but also, thanks to your collaboration too. So we are looking at your RFI responses. Obviously, within your RFI letters, we give you 60 days to reply. We would ask that people get those into us as soon as possible so that we can finalise those applications at the earliest opportunity. Again, just a note around submitting updated sequences if you do have any additional data or you have up-to-date GMP certificates or QP declarations. I would also like to remind you around the product information. If this is a generic product or even a hybrid where you have a reference product, we would like to see a side-by-side comparison of the summary product characteristics between the reference product and your proposed product. We would like you to justify where any differences you're making and why you're doing that. We would like the same again for the patient information leaflet. This makes our review so much quicker. And we're not necessarily proofreading that, it is there in front of us to expedite that part of the assessment. And again, just reminding people about the checklists I mentioned earlier that have been helpful and are improving the quality of applications, and we would ask that people still use those before making their submissions. So with that, I think I'm going to hand on to Julian to conclude this section of the webinar before we move to Q&As. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rachel. So with all of those improvements and the work that we've all been doing together, it is obviously bringing you back to why we're doing it. So obviously that they're looking at how do we have facilitating safe access to the medicines that we have. So all of these things are really driving the aspect of what we do on a daily basis. Fundamentally, operational efficiency really is what we will be looking at to make sure that we metric ourselves, to make sure that we understand by our performance, are we capable of looking at the processes that we have. With that, we will also be looking at our forecast accuracy, so the demand signals that we've had. So the webinar that we ran on the 26th of September, looking at how we can obtain forecast information. That is essential for us to predict what volumes we have coming in. So if you haven't seen that webinar, I would really encourage you to have a look and engage with the tools that we are requesting to predict volumes coming to us. And this is so that we can then ensure that as we come to a time when you are submitting that application on day 0, we already know it's coming. We are already aware of the likely time nature, the resource nature, how much planning needs to go into it from our side, so that we can then deliver that reliable on-time performance in terms of granting a license within statutory timelines. And that is fundamentally what we're looking at. So just to reiterate, as Rachel had done through it, we are now looking at turning licenses around within statutory timelines, so to the 210 days for those submitted and validated post 1st of September. For other applications which are in the backlog, first questions should be coming to applicants or decisions where we can do before Christmas and into January for those ones which are later responding to us, always picking up slightly later. And really to conclude that it is not a light switch. It's not going to be that from the 1st of January or from any particular date that we will be seeing those day 100 questions, as I'm sure we would all like to have them coming through. That is not going to happen in the short term. But what we are looking to do is to, as quickly as we can do, as we go through next year, to bring those timelines back to where we would expect to be. And then really looking to a program of regulatory reform. What it has shown us is that our previous methodology of review and how do we stratify applications can be improved, can be changed. So that's something else that we will be looking at over the coming months to understand what is important from industry, what is important to NHS, what is important to MHRA, to ensure that we have the appropriate quality, safety and efficacy review of medicines, but to what timeline. So that's something that we are looking at. So clearing the backlog is essential to enable us to then look forward and see where we can be going. And then finally, again, thank you to our staff. Thank you to you, the industry, for helping us get to where we are. We are all doing this for a reason, so that people, it could be ourselves, get the medicines that we need when we need them. We will be looking to do a further webinar on clinics, so to answer any other regulatory questions as well. On the there are further winter framework questionnaires or webinars also planned, as well as one on reclassification, as well as one on supply shortages. So really just looking at keeping that, going back to our business plan about being transparent, that's really where we are looking to be, and open and as transparent as we can be. So again, thank you to Rachel and thank you to the others that have contributed in running this webinar. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Julian, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate if you would complete that and provide your feedback. You will also receive a follow-up email in the coming weeks with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. On behalf of the MHRA and our presenters, thank you for joining us today and enjoy the rest of your day.